Gospel of Mark. Mark chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. And he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and in 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. Then they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them, and taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
His name was Abel Head Pierce. Everyone knew him as Shanghai Pierce. He was born June 29th, 1834, in New Hampshire, of all places. But at the age of 17, he decided to stow away on a freighter to make his way to Texas, to seek his fame and his fortune. When he arrived in Texas, he had 75 cents in his pocket, and he decided to promote his childhood nickname of Shanghai, referring to his resemblance of a Shanghai rooster with his 6'4" frame and that the long-legged breed of that rooster. From the very start, Shanghai Pierce began to work in the cattle business, bartering a year's work for $200 worth of cattle to begin his own herd. After the year, he began branding stray cattle and building his herd, and in a short period of time, he had built a herd large enough to entitle him the appellation of cattle baron. He was quite a sight on the Texas plains, wearing broad-cated vests, broad-rimmed, high-peaked hats. It was even said that he ordered his own gravesite statue prior to his death, so he could supposedly lift a glass to toast himself at night. And he'd go, "Here's to old Shanghai." If legend has any truth about him, this grandiose ego would make Donald Trump look as if he had an inferiority complex. At his ranch, he decided to build a city with everything that he needed by his employees. He called the town, "Thank God, Texas," until some of his more refined friends convinced him that Blessings, Texas, had a better and more acceptable sound to it. In his later years, Shanghai invited some of his friends from Boston to visit him on his ranch. He toured them throughout the complex, bragging about his considerable accomplishments in developing this veritable city. As they rode through the dusty streets in a buggy driven by 2 white horses, Shanghai would point out the various landmarks. "Well, over there's the commissary, best in the territory. And over there's the school, 2 rooms, not 1. And over there's the livery, best blacksmith in the state of Texas. And over there's the saloon, finest whiskey on this side of the Mississippi." And the list went on as Shanghai puffed out his chest like his namesake rooster. As they were continuing on Shanghai's tour, one of his guests spotted a steeple of a church set in a group of mesquite trees. He asked his host, "Shanghai, do Do you belong to that church? Shanghai spat out some tobacco juice and bellowed, "Heck no, that church belongs to me." In our passage today, we find that the disciples themselves were caught up in an argument as to who is the greatest and who's in charge and who will be in control when Jesus is gone. If you'll look at the previous verses, you'll see that this conversation occurs immediately after Peter's confession that Jesus was the Messiah, which is the very center of Mark's gospel. And it's right after this that Jesus tries to explain the true nature of greatness. It's not position or possession, but rather being a servant. Jesus tried and tried to get it through the hardened brains of his students who only saw the Messiah as one who would come in power and glory. Rather, Jesus was trying to get them to see that the Messiah was one who would be a servant, one who would give himself for others, who would ultimately become a sacrifice for us through his death on a cross. That would prove to be a hard sell for them as well as for some people today. And what's more, Jesus then calls his disciples to follow him in the same way of being a servant. Jesus is crystal clear in his message to those disciples and to us. If you are to follow my way, you must be a servant. Case closed. So, do you not find it odd that immediately following this command, the disciples are literally on the road with Jesus, but they're still not following in the way of Jesus? They're discussing among themselves who among them is the greatest. They're quarreling about who's number one, immediately following the exhortation that to really follow Jesus in the way, one must be a servant. The gospel writer Mark is making a strategic move in placing this story so close to that command of serving. We overhear Jesus asking the disciples what they've been so busy discussing. And just like kids caught in bad behavior, they fall silent, hoping that the transgression would be overlooked. But rather than forcing the confession, Jesus makes one of those amazing statements that pierce our preconceptions about reality. He says, "The one who wants to be first must be last. He must be servant of all." What a bombshell that must have been. It runs so counter to the way that culture teaches us to think about ourselves. Be number one in all that you do. Strive to be on top. Use whatever means necessary to have power. Our culture has shanghaied us into thinking that the reality of competition rules the day. That's just the way it is. Isn't that what our society is all about? Competition? To see who's the best? This view of reality has been infused into us. But here in our reading, Jesus offers another view of life, a subversion, if you will. A version of reality that says that the key to a deep joy in living is that of servanthood, of giving oneself to others. Admittedly, it's not an easy thing to buy into when society has been telling us differently all of our lives. Jesus reminds his followers, his closest disciples, over and over again that we are here to serve. His last and perhaps greatest lesson on servanthood is found in John 13. And there it says, "So he rose from the table, took off his outer garment and tied a towel around his waist. Then he poured some water into a wash basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet, and to dry them with the towel around his waist. After Jesus had washed their feet, he put his outer garment back on and returned to his place at the table. And he asked, "Do you understand what I've just done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and it is right that you do so because that is what I am. I, your Lord and your teacher, have just washed your feet. You then should wash one another's feet. I've set an example for you, so that you will do just what I have done for you. I'm telling you the truth. No slaves are greater than their master, and no messengers are greater than the one who sent them. Now that you know the truth, how happy you'll be if you put it into practice." To fully understand the significance of this passage from John, there's just a couple pieces of background information that you need. First, the root of this practice of washing the guests' feet appears to be found in the hospitality customs of ancient civilization.